The global economic crisis affected Pakistan at the same time that it was undergoing domestic challenges. Right. What was worse for the banking system? Was it the external shock or was it internal?
I think internal shock. I would argue that even among other emerging countries, the impact of the global financial crisis in the banking sector has been minimal. And the central bank stepped in where they were needed to inject liquidity, which was the problem which arose soon after Lehman Brothers crisis. And the central bank did that. But the domestic slowdown in the economic activity, right from 7 to 8% growth rate, if you have only 2 to 3% growth rate, there is no demand for private sector credit. The consumer credit has dried up. The banks are very cautious as far as the counterparty credit risk is concerned. The liquidity is in short supply. All these reasons arising from the domestic mismanagement and lack of decisions which were taken by the previous government has affected the banking sector more than the global financial crisis.
Given that the situation is as you described, isn't current account convertibility one of the solutions?
You mean the capital account?
Sorry, capital account.
No, because when you have a crisis of confidence, what do the people do? And they did. Through the informal channels, which is called hundi and hawala, a lot of Pakistanis took their money to Dubai during the 2008 and 2009. It's now that the confidence is coming back that they are bringing their money. If you had a complete convertibility of the capital account, all the money would have disappeared officially and the exchange rate would have gone down the drain and the crisis of confidence would have been worse than what it is today.
In the time that you were governor, what transformations did you put in place to enable the productive economy to benefit from the remittances coming in?
I believe that government banks are not able to allocate capital efficiently because they owe their jobs to the government, so they will take the orders from their masters and therefore give them on the political basis, and that was the case. But as 80% of the assets of the banking sector are now under the private hands, and there is a competition, only those who have the creditworthiness profile are able to access the bank credit. That means that only those companies and those households which have the capacity to repay those loans by generating income stream are being given the credit.
But isn't that counterintuitive?
Because we have a very strong regulator, and the regulator looks at the credit profile of all the new borrowers, and if they find that there is something like subprime, I think they will take them to task, and that's the reason why there were no subprime borrowing in Pakistan.
What kind of further reforms do you think should be in place in order to be able to sustain in this environment?
I think the first reform is that the central bank's automatic lending to the government by creation of the treasury bills should be legally discontinued. There should be a law which disallows that.
Is it something that you would recommend for emerging countries in general?
In general. I think what we have learned, that one of the reasons for inflation in our country was the high-powered money creation by the central bank. And if you have weak central banks who cannot take a stand against the ministries of finance, at least they should have the legal protection. And that is one thing. The second issue in emerging markets is that we should have a bankruptcy laws. There should be orderly transition of those people who are unable to do business under the current business regime to a new business regime. And like the developed countries, bankruptcy laws have destroyed inefficient companies and inefficient industries, while they have allowed efficient industries to restructure and rehabilitate themselves and carry on the business. And that's exactly what the emerging economies need. And the bankruptcy laws are not that effective, even if they exist in some of the emerging economies.
What about the creation of capital markets?
No, I was coming to
Okay.
that. You must have a wide spectrum from capital markets on one side to the microfinance on the other side. Unfortunately, both the ends of the spectrum are incomplete or missing in emerging economies. For poverty alleviation, we must have microfinance where it is not based on collateral or security. On capital markets, it is your reputation and your creditworthiness to access capital through the impersonal markets rather than relationship banking. And the middle markets and the households should be served by the banking sector and other financial services. So these two ends of the spectrum are incomplete or missing in emerging markets, and they ought to be complete. For example, I did a study on Asian bond markets. They are just non-existent as far as the corporate sector is concerned. And there are good companies in China, in Malaysia, in Philippines, Indonesia, who can raise money on the bond markets.
Right.
Why should they go to the banks alone?
Right.
Then you have concentration risk,
Right.
single party exposure limits.
Right.
That comes in the way
Right.
of expansion.
There's one